Welcome to the Winning Wellness Podcast, where we explore health, wellness, performance, and try to improve not only your quantity of life, but your quality of life. I'm your host, Mitch Schwartzman.
Thank you to Coach Bryan Mchpherson today for joining us on the Winning Wellness Podcast. I wanted to reach out to him and capture a conversation with him for quite a few reasons. Probably the top two would be that he is a resourceful coach. He had an opportunity to come work with us over at Linwood University, and then that fell out on the back end, and he kind of didn't take no for an answer and found other ways to just kind of make it happen. So we'll dive into that a little bit. And then also his swim specialty is extremely interesting, very high level, and a great background there. So we've got a bunch of good stuff to talk to Coach Mcpherson. Thanks for joining us, Coach.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Instead of me butchering the story, could you maybe start by telling us a little bit about kind of how you got involved in the weight room? And then could you kind of talk about what happened, your time with Linwood, and kind of what happened there?
Yeah, so when it comes to me getting familiar, like into the weight room, so I started like growing up, I did pretty much baseball and basketball were the two main sports I played like as a kid. And then when I got to age 11, the summer when I was 11, I swam on the local like summer club team for 3 months or whatever it was. And I wasn't like grabbed immediately, but I'm like, oh yeah, this is pretty cool. Like I knew a couple of my friends from school had swam on the team year round. So the next summer, I did the summer league team again, and then I decided to start swimming year round. So that's I was 12 when I started doing that, and then as I got more in the water and just trained more consistently, I noticed probably because I'd started so late, because like I feel comfortable saying most swimmers who swim year round, they'll start swimming year round when they're like 8, 9, 10 years old. So I was a couple of like literally kind of years behind the 8 ball there, or years behind schedule, I should say. So I was always like, we trained for high school is a great example. What I'll tell people is I had, including me, there were 6 guys that I trained with pretty consistently in my group when I was going through high school. And I was the 6th fastest. I was the slowest in every event, from the standpoint of it didn't matter if it was like sprint freestyle, distance, IM, like distance freestyle, breaststroke, butterfly, whatever. I was the slowest in every event. So going through swim practice, we were doing our thing, and then we started training dryland, which is what swimmers call just like strength training out of the water. I noticed even though I was the 6th fastest in every event, I was pretty much beating all the guys, or using more weight, doing more reps, like whatever exercise we were doing, whatever the workout was, it kind of just depended on the day. I was able to beat them at dryland. So I'm like, okay, this is pretty cool. Like you can beat me in the water and all that kind of stuff, but I'm going to have it. I'm going to have the advantage in dryland. So that kind of, put me on the path to becoming more interested in the weight room as a whole, and then also the world of sports performance as a profession. So then that led me to swimming in college. I got my bachelor's in exercise science from Eastern Illinois University, class of 2018. And that's where going through college, I did a couple internships. Like I kind of fast forwarded, but I did some internships. I did my first personal training job. I think I was 19 when I did that. So I started like actually coaching and doing it as, like a job, but then going through the coursework at Eastern and the internships along the way, I was like, oh yeah, this is kind of something I want to do. And that led me to University of Louisville, class of 2020. So that's where I got my master's degree in exercise phys, focusing on the sports performance side of things. But the really cool part about that was both years I was getting my master's from, on the academic side of things. I was able to get into the Marshall Center, which is where their sports teams trained, as a volunteer assistant strength coach with various teams. But my first year, like I said, like track and field, a couple of baseball lifts here and there, swimming, track and field. But my second year, I was offered a spot to stay on in the same capacity with the swim team. So that was really, that was a pretty easy yes, because being like a mid-major D1 talent, being able to see as an athlete myself, mid-major D1 talent, being able to see how like they send athletes to the Olympics, they have NCAA champions, ACC champions. Being able to see how they train was really beneficial from a coaching standpoint. And then that led, once I graduated with my master's from U of L, I was part of the COVID class with that class of 2020, which led into Lindenwood. I had gotten a job as it was a unique situation because, as I remember, it was a couple years ago at this point, but basically it was technically a GA, but the way they had it set up was really beneficial for a guy who already had his master's, because all I had to do, like, they didn't, typically it would be like, hey, here's the stipend, we'll pay for, like however many hours you need to get to be like a student, like we'll just waive that stipend. What Lindenwood had, assuming I remember correctly, is they just paid like X hours at X rate or whatever that ended up being, enough to cover going to school and like housing and all that stuff. But with the situation I was in, since I already had my master's degree and I didn't need to get like another one, like it wasn't that, all I had to do was take one class per semester and I would be able to just like pocket all the money as like a typical job. So that was one of the, I'm like, oh yeah, this setup is pretty sweet. But COVID came in and like, I think it was Reese, like we were still in the Louisville house. So it had to be like late spring, early summer. And he's like, hey, like all those positions are gone as far like the budget side of things, like saving money, like who knows how long we have to save money for and all that stuff from the school side of things. So I was kind of like, well, crap, because pretty much up until that point, I had pretty much no primary experience on the collegiate side of things. So, just means like I wasn't writing the workouts. My resume pretty much always said assisted the head coach in implementing training. Like I hadn't done the programming myself. And obviously a lot of schools were using that against me because outside of Lindenwood, I had one other coach respond on top out of like 50 or 60 applications I sent out. I don't remember how many. I don't remember how many. I do remember I only got 2 responses. So I was like, okay, like what am I going to do now? So it's pretty much a standpoint of, I had been, because I had started working with SwimStrong for about a year up until that point, whenever it was like, hey, like those paid positions are gone. We didn't have enough teams for me to do it on a full-time basis. Like when I first started with SwimStrong, Eric could literally only pay me like 5 hours a week is what it was. So obviously like I had to figure some other stuff out. And now the Lindenwood situation, I wasn't going to get any money from that. So I had been doing some part-time personal training jobs like for the past several years at this point. So I moved back to St. Louis. My now wife, fiance at the time, moved back to Chicago area with her family. And so I started, working as like a primary. I was doing the primary coaching at Lindenwood, but on a volunteer basis still. But then I had 3 other part-time jobs on top of that, like including SwimStrong, 2 personal training type jobs, and then SwimStrong. Because I figured like it would take a bit for SwimStrong to build up to what I needed it to be from a financial standpoint. And I figured, like who knows how long that's going to take. I will say it took a lot. It didn't take nearly as long as we thought it would. So like I'm doing that full time now. But until that point, because at the time, like who knows how long this is going to take, I need to get something handled. And I do enjoy the collegiate setting. So it was a manner of doing in terms of the sectors, I was literally doing everything. I had like the private sector, the collegiate sector, and then like the online world going on. Because I did enjoy the collegiate setting. I didn't want to be like, oh, okay, like I've interned for like 3 years straight at that point, basically. I don't want to make all that for nothing. I will be able to be like the primary coach here with swimming and hockey, which is and golf as well, which is what ended up happening. So that kind of sums it all up when it comes to, like why did I coach at Lindenwood, like for free, basically, because I had been interning for so long. So looking back at it now, I was pretty much in every sector, from the standpoint of I was doing online work with SwimStrong because I'm sure we'll talk about it in more detail later, but we are a fully virtual company. I was doing in-person coaching with collegiate athletes, and I was rocking the private sector with the in-person personal training as well. But I kind of like, for lack of a better term, I guess like put up with it from the standpoint of doing like 4 different jobs at once, because I did really enjoy coaching in the collegiate setting. And then like I never fully loved personal training, especially in person, because I feel like a good amount of people were just content spinning their wheels, and then like athletes have like they're working for something, like for swimming, for example, like it's obvious you want to drop time, you want to win conference championships as the team, obviously, then individuals, relays, NCAA championships, you want to work for that. The hockey guys, and I was there, same exact thing. So I always did enjoy the collegiate setting from the standpoint of it's a group of athletes working together as a team to go for championships and all that good stuff. So that was why, like, hey, like, yeah, even though I'm not getting paid with Lindenwood, maybe it'll happen in the future from the standpoint of either getting a job there, other opportunities, and then obviously, like SwimStrong grew into what it was, which led me down that path, with time.
Yeah. So, as an outside observer, I was kind of there for the, disappearance of the Lindenwood paid opportunity, and we kind of stayed in contact with you, and you just kind of made it happen anyways. So that's always like, as someone who did several years of interning and things like that, it's always something that's like, you can't help but respect that. And like, if there's any young coaches listening, you just gotta understand, like, sometimes that's what you deal with in this industry. And then especially to like, Linwood is gonna pay you, they're hired, and then they cut positions and they chop it, and like, you don't burn that bridge, and you just find a way to make it happen anyway. So that's some pretty impressive stuff. Knowing that, like, you're trying to build your bank account and you're trying to make things happen. It's just a tough part of our world that we live in, and you kind of like power through in a pretty impressive way. Can you maybe kind of shift gears a little bit and take us to school on swimming? You're a SwimStrong coach, which means that you spend all of your time working with that company as a programmer. I mean, from what last I heard, the organization has like different people playing different roles, and then you are a programmer who sits over maybe how many teams. Tell us about how many teams, and then if you can kind of take us to school on some of the things that you focus on, like maybe some KPIs, and then any like common injuries would be fantastic too.
Yeah, so SwimStrong, for our organizational setup, like I said, we have multiple people. Like within that, there's 8 of us now, I think. We all have our different areas we're focused on. Me personally, because we have, as of now, I think 50 club teams, 45, 50 club teams. I don't know the exact number. I'm in charge of directly programming for teams 1 through 30. And then we have another guy on our team, Steve, who's directly in charge of handling teams 31 to potentially 60, if and when we get there. But he is, utilizing the programs that I'm sending him. So, like, we're all like the entire program, like teams, 31 through 60, even though Steve is the one writing their workouts, it's essentially that program was born out of what I wrote, so all teams are using a program that's speaking the same language, basically. And it works out because me and Steve we're like 90% the same with stuff. So that definitely works out. But then me personally, yeah. So I'm with teams 1 through 30. What they do is tell us our 10 and unders train. They'll let me know the names of each of their groups. Like, a common thing is 10 and unders are bronze, 11 to 12s are silver, 13, 14s are gold, and then 15, 18s is like the national group or whatever. So they'll let me know, hey, our bronze group trains for 3 days a week for 20 minutes. So those are the 10 and unders, the little guys. Our 11 to 12s, the silver group trains 4 days a week for half an hour. This is all dryland because I don't do anything with the swimming. Like, that's all the swim coach. Our gold group, so the 13, 14s, they'll train, say 5 days a week for 30 minutes. And then our senior group, national group, like the high schoolers, they'll train, 6 days a week for 45 minutes. They'll tell me, because I'll do, like onboarding calls with all of them. They'll say we have 2 pull-up bars, dumbbells up to 50 pounds, bands, med balls, all that stuff. But some other teams will also tell us we have bands and that's it. So that'll be on me to then individualize each program for each age group based on skill level. Because if a team is coming in and they'll tell me something like no group has done dryland, like strength training out of the water at all, like they'll obviously start much more basic than if a team comes on. This has happened kind of recently for us, and told us that, yeah, like these kids have been rocking it for like 2 years with like a structured program. Like, I don't need to start as simple with them. So it's a way of, really getting to know the coaches' situations and the athlete's history from the standpoint of, making sure like, they hit the ground running, whatever that means for them. Like if it needs to be a little bit easier, like majority body weight, I'll make it that. But if they've been training consistently for 2 years, whatever the case is, I don't need to do that. Like I'll obviously make sure that they onboard appropriately with where they're at to the SwimStrong program. But I don't need to, I don't need to take baby steps with those older groups. So it's really just a manner of understanding the coaches, the teams from a scheduling, equipment, previous history standpoint.
And then when I first started working with swim several years ago, the swim coaches talking about dryland. He's using that phrase dryland. And I had to have him speak like slowly and to me like I was like 3 years old. I'm like, what do you mean dryland? And he's just saying dryland is anything out of the water. Dryland could be like a run, almost like a CrossFit circuit type of thing, or just a weight training session. So if you're the dryland director programmer for different teams, like let's say I think the bronze team is 4 half-hour sessions a week. Is that what you said?
So that would be the silver, the 11-12s.
Okay. So if that's the silver, if that's 4 half-hour sessions a week, what are you looking to accomplish? And you don't have to stick to the silver group, but what are you looking to accomplish in there? Is it more strength-based? Are you trying to skyrocket heart rates? What are you pursuing?
Yeah, so I'd say with every athlete, take like a big picture look at it first. With every athlete in the program, the way I describe it to people is I want SwimStrong swimmers, to be athletes who just happen to swim. So there's multiple ways I go about that because like I mentioned earlier, swimming, like a lot of swimmers start swimming year round when they're younger than 10 years old. And all of those yards you swim on the shoulders, the hips, like the lower leg, the ankles, like that all has an impact. So I'm not going to ignore that fact entirely because honestly, like if you look at one of my 11-12s, 10 and under for like those silver and bronze, like I could train a 10 and under swimmer, soccer player, football player, like basketball, whatever, like, cause it's a lot of just foundational movement type of stuff. Generally speaking, for the 10 and unders, like some coaches will ask for slightly different stuff, but it all kind of falls under this umbrella from an age group standpoint. For the 10 and unders, it'll be like practice the squat in a high plank hold for 6 minutes or whatever, rest a couple minutes, like get the kids' attention spans back if that's something that group has to worry about. And then afterwards, they'll play like red light, green light with flutter kicks or whatever, or mountain climbers could be something like that. They can play, the classic, like partner water bottle, like head, shoulders, knees, toes, go grab the water bottle, just stuff like that. For the 11-12s, maybe 11-14s, depending on the team and how they group their age groups up. So it's a little bit more structured from the standpoint of there are still I start all the teams, like some teams like grow out of this, which is a good thing because they're, the kids are developing properly. But I'll do something like, 5 minutes to practice, like a forward lunge, lateral lunge, yoga push-up, whatever. And then after that 5 minutes, I'll turn it into a circuit. So it'll be like a 7-minute circuit. And by circuit, what we tell coaches and athletes is they should not be resting like a minute in between exercises, but I also don't want them or need them really to be like chasing reps or anything like that to make sure like, oh, I have to get like X amount of rounds in. Like I'll do that stuff sometimes with the older athletes, but for the 11-14s, especially 11-12s for like the silver group example, it'll be like 5 minutes practicing a squat or hip hinge RDL, for instance, like all body weight with those guys. And then after that, it'll be like a 7-8 minute circuit, depending on how much time they have rotating through. It could be something like a squat, a push up, like a side plank hold for those 3 exercises in order. For 12 and unders, it's pretty much always going to be body weight. For 11-12s, if the coach is telling us they're crushing technique and it's kind of like, hey, like they can hold like a 10-pound med ball or something like that. But I tell athletes, I tell parents that like I really don't care about how much weight you're utilizing at that age. And that's actually something because I talked to an athlete for the small group. She's turning 13 in a month or 2 here, so she's right on the edge. Because the small group is really for athletes 13-18. But if you're going to turn 13 in a couple months, we'll still talk to you here to make sure you're set up and ready to go. So she was 12 years old. Her mom reached out because her club team utilized, it was a third-party trainer of some sort, but they had this her daughter's 12 at the time, lifting with the 18-year-olds, like lifting with the high schoolers. Like she didn't say exactly what it was, but so this 12-year-old was rocking dumbbell bench press, I think is what, if I remember correctly. She has to get an MRI already on her shoulder because she messed up something. Like she didn't tell me exactly what happened, obviously, but like a 12-year-old should not be doing dumbbell bench press with the high schoolers like that. We'll be doing push-ups for sure. We'll be doing TRX rows if the kids can handle that from a maturity standpoint, because some kids, like I have coaches telling me, TRX rows are a no because they'll be like throwing them at their teammates and stuff like that, like just stuff like that, right? With kids having attention spans being what they are and the maturity level. Like if I have to do all body weight, I will. But for the 12 and unders, it's a lot of body weight type of movements, athletic based movements, learning how to side shuffle correctly, like doing baseline plyometrics, just being an athlete out of the water. Because, the thing about swimming is when you really look at it, you dive in, you swim in a straight line down and back for 2 hours a day, most likely a shorter amount of time for the younger athletes. And then there is no, side to side, like I'll use hockey as the example on the flip side of that, because, those guys, they had to account for, not counting goalies, their 4 teammates, their 5 opponents, the refs, where's the puck? Like if they're going to make a play on the wall, like, hey, am I about to get blown up by a guy I don't see coming? Like they have to be ready and able to move in 360 degrees, like depend on where the play goes, depend on where the puck takes them in that specific example. Same thing can be said for, like a shortstop in baseball, a basketball player guarding an opponent. Like this dude, he can go 360 degrees, and the basketball player has to react to that. In swimming, it's just you dive in and then you're swimming straight line back and forth, and that's the sport basically. There are different strokes, but like it's still just going in a straight line down and back. So for me personally, I want to make sure I'm addressing, I just call it athletic development, and that means different things for the high schoolers than it does for the 8 and unders, the 10 and unders and all that. Because like for the 10 and unders, I'll literally do like stand on one foot for 10 seconds each side. If that's too easy, close one eye. If that's too easy, close 2 eyes. Like there's other balance, literally just working on balance, because swimmers have that fish out of water stereotype that I want to make sure, again, I want to make sure that SwimStrong swimmers are athletes who just happen to swim. So like making sure I address in some way, shape or form, their stability, balance, coordination is going to be a constant in an age appropriate fashion within all those age groups. But you get to the older athletes, where like more equipment is going to be used. It's still what we tell athletes and coaches and really parents too, is because the main thing we deal with is, the classic stereotypical high school boy, like they just want to go get big with their friends who play football or whatever. Like they want to go rip barbell bench press, barbell back squat, like, the typical, like, the stereotypical strength-based movements. Well, you don't do a ton of those. Like I have trap bar deadlifts in there as an option, but when it comes to lower body pushing, like squatting patterns, like I'm a big fan of unilateral training for swimmers, because you get you saw me at Lindenwood, like we were ripping those safety bar split squats. Like I know like it's a split squat position, you're not lunging, but from the standpoint of like we were doing skater squats when I was there at Lindenwood, we were rocking the skater squats, the rear leg elevated split squats. I do like training unilaterally for swimmers because on top of because I know that could be a different argument from the standpoint of bilateral versus unilateral. But when you're looking at swimming specifically, like can the swimmer can they move confidently, and can they move and or absorb produce force competently when they're on one leg instead of 2? Like in my mind, that addresses the athleticism side of things, the coordination side of things, like learning how to do a skater squat correctly, just moving on one leg. And that we have like hand supported options in there as well. But I do like unilateral training, especially with the lower body for swimmers, just to get like a lateral lunge, rotational lunge, get different planes of motion going on, because they pretty much live in the sagittal plane when it comes to what they're doing on the water. So it's a way we can get multiple planes of motion going on, and also address some pretty important stuff, like a skater squat, Cossack squat, whatever, lunging patterns, just the stability, athleticism, balance, coordination side of developing a swimmer into an athlete that I like with the unilateral movements.
Yeah, I think you just dropped a lot of great stuff on us there, to kind of like relate a little bit. Again, I've been working with swim for around 6 or 7 years here. And I did not realize when I first started working with them that I really wasn't strengthening them that much for the water. I'm actually strengthening them as much or more for their dry land work, because where are they getting most of their injuries? Where are they getting most of their tweaks and falling behind? It's not in the water. The water's pretty nice to you. Now you
Yeah.
get those overuse injuries, but when they hop out of the water and they're doing stadiums and they're running mileage and they're doing burpees and stuff like that, we're getting a lot of like acute injuries from some of that dry land work. And then, that's just, you talk about that athletic development for swimmers, and it's something that's needed so bad in my experience. So definitely, you got a lot of neurons firing over here. I'm just thinking about like, oh my gosh, I've had so similar of an experience just working with them. As a side note, do you see many concussions with your swimmers?
I was actually going to say, because we'll have some acute injuries every now and then, but the majority of stuff I see is more of the chronic variety, like with the shoulders. That's obviously just because swimming is a repetitive overhead sport. And then we'll see some groins with groin hip issues with breaststrokers, IMers especially. And then we'll get every now and then there'll be some, it kind of just, it's not like debilitating or anything, but every swimmer will know, because whenever I, give my presentation for the program for athletes and their parents, I'll be like, hey, have you ever had that big calf cramp, shin splint kind of feeling before when you're having a big kick set? Every single one of them either has done it or they know the feeling because of their teammate Charlie Horse the day before. It's why, because like we don't, as far as SwimStrong, I've never done running. I've never programmed running as part of the SwimStrong program, because for a couple reasons. One of them, obviously, like, the lower leg, in my opinion, isn't, as a lower leg of a swimmer, isn't really prepared to handle all the ground contacts, because like, we're in water all the time. Like, we don't really need to, and we aren't prepared for that based on what we do in the water. And also from a conditioning standpoint, because we post this on the gram every like 6 months or whatever, because from like the engagement standpoint, like it's a message, it's a hot topic for sure. And then strictly from a performance standpoint, like if you're, because they're swimming in college, they're swimming like 16 hours a week, because I know every team splits up in those 20 hours between in water and out of water training a little bit differently, but I'd say like confidently minimum 15 hours a week is going to be in the water. Like from a dry land strength training standpoint, I would much rather take that time, because in club the numbers are a little bit different. Like we still have teams, athletes ripping doubles on like 2-3 days a week, depending on the team they're on. But if they're already swimming all those yards in the water from an energy system, like conditioning standpoint, like why would I have them run more during dry land, with speaking within my terms, right? Because I would much rather focus on stuff like mobility, shoulder resiliency, making a more resilient lower leg, specifically within the demands of holding the streamline position, like strengthening the dorsiflexion pattern is what I pay attention to. Working on strength, working on power, working on athletic development. There's a lot more buckets that need to be filled on top of just, I'm just going to run them more, because like their conditioning should be pretty good if they're swimming at the collegiate level at least 15 hours a week. Like the swim coach, that bucket should be getting filled in practice. So I look to other avenues, or other buckets to fill, I should say, from the standpoint of like, what are we going to do with, like, in college, like the 4 or 5 hours you have out of the water, address the mobility, full body resiliency, athletic development types of things.
Nice. How about concussions? Do you see much head trauma in your athletes?
That's right. Yeah, I bypassed that originally. I went on the tangent there, but no, I don't see, unless like, because that's actually one of the acute injuries I'll see. Is like one of my teammates in high school, like they were swimming laps, and it was the outdoor pool in Wood River, Illinois. So basically the outdoor pool, we would swim there in the summer because it was long course, it was Olympic size. And the only times, I think there's one other instance that I know of where someone got a concussion. But basically, like, like if you watch a competitive swim meet, you'll see flags, like I think they're 5 yards out from the wall, like hanging above. Those are so the backstrokers know when you're in line with, like I knew whenever my eyes got in line with the flags, I think it was I took 2 or 3 strokes and then flipped over because I knew the wall would be right there. So this guy, the flags at this outdoor pool were not maintained. I think there's over a 8-lane pool. I think there was like 4 flags on the entire thing. So he was looking into the sun. He didn't see it, and he was really good. He went on to swim Power 5 D1. He made Olympic trials for the 200 backstroke, so he was really good. He was moving pretty quick. So he swam directly into the wall and gave himself a concussion from that. But outside of that, unless, like 2 athletes are swimming backstroke and accidentally, like don't see each other, outside of those 2 kind of like freak accidents, you can call it, like I really don't see much, no.
Okay. I think, and again, my swim experience is limited. But I think I may have like a hot streak of freak accidents over the last half a dozen years. So I wanted to get your experience on that. Before we move on from the injuries, can you school us a little bit on maybe some shoulder care? Maybe a swimmer's listening to this right now, and without making a diagnosis, maybe just a generalization. What are some common shoulder issues you see, and what are some common strategies you take to intervene?
Yeah, so the main thing is bicep tendonitis is pretty common, and then just your general shoulder impingements. Like you'll see a good amount of scapular depression in swimmers just with how lat dominant they are, which means if your shoulder blades are depressed, which means they sit a little bit lower because the lats are indirectly kind of dragging them down with the way the lat muscle is structured. So the main things I do, because I talk about this topic all the time with coaches, athletes, and parents, is I've just come to call it shoulder resiliency, because whenever I was in the collegiate setting, like you could tell which strength coach, like the strength coach I was with at the time, you could tell if they had worked with swimming or not. Like that's why it was awesome working with Jason Durking. I'm pretty sure he's still the head coach there. Whenever I was there, he offered me the spot to stay on and work with the swimmers. Like he trains Ironmans and competes Ironmans now, so he actually swims. So that was really nice to see. Because the main thing that bugs me is like they only do like T-spine open books and then like your rotator cuff internal external rotations, and then that's it. So the main things I'll go through, because I talk about this with every like presentation I give to athletes who are interested in the program. We actually call them interviews to make sure that the athletes are like in tune with what the program is about from like a buy-in, time commitment standpoint. So the different components of shoulder resiliency I like to address is the lat muscle itself, because with every single time they take a stroke, regardless of main stroke, butterfly, backstroke, breaststroke, or freestyle, that's the lat muscle doing its thing. So stretch, foam roll, whatever you prefer. Like I've been athletes who have pull-up bars or teams who have pull-up bars, I've been pointing them towards just like dead hangs as a way to address the lat muscle. Like hanging knee raises is a good exercise I like to use for that reason. And also you get the hip flexors in the abdominal musculature as well. So the lats are one component. The position of the rib cage is another component, because basically an exercise I like to utilize, I call it a bench lat inhibition, because I think everyone is familiar, like strength coaches should be familiar with the bench T-spine mobility, where you get the PVC, put the elbows on the bench, and then get into extension. I actually do the opposite, because when it comes to however, you could do the math. If your athletes do like a 5,000, 6,000 yard practice, on average they take this many strokes per 25. Like you could do the math of how many strokes they take, but it's going to be a lot. So from the standpoint of making sure the shoulder complex as a whole is able to do its job effectively, making sure the rib cage is giving the proper surface for the shoulder blade to essentially glide on is very important. So the bench lat inhibition, like you'll get in the same position with the PVC with the elbows, but instead of getting into like leaning back into extension, like you'll literally have athletes, I'll literally tell them like get all hunchback and Notre Dame on it and really round your rib cage. Think about reaching your elbows through the bench to, again, just create the stability that you can then breathe in that position. Because when I breathe in that position, I then want to emphasize expansion of the rib cage to, again, make sure, because for the visual, our rib cage has a natural curvature to it, and so does our shoulder blades, so does the scapula. So that leads us to believe if the rib cage relationship between the rib cage, the scapulothoracic joint, if that's not as efficient as possible, that leads us to believe, okay, the shoulder blade, may not be able to move as efficiently, which then leads to the issues at the glenohumeral joint with the actual, like ball and socket of the shoulder itself. So the position of the rib cage, specifically rib cage expansion, is something I look to a lot. So that's 2. Number 3 is T-spine mobility. Most people have that covered. Number 4 is developing, strengthening, making the serratus interior muscle more resilient, because with that muscle, you're looking at protraction, you're looking at upward rotation. So strengthening those two, whether it's like with a serratus crawl, which is what I call, if you basically, it's a backwards bear crawl, basically with your hips up in the air, where you can really emphasize reaching with each rep. There's banded exercises I like to use, you get wall slide variations. And then when it comes to swimming, like I did this at Lindenwood with the collegiate athletes, but especially more so with the club athletes I work with now. I'll do dumbbell bench press. I did that with I do it with SwimStrong, and I did it with Lindenwood as well. But if you walked in, you probably saw it, you probably looked over, like on some days you probably saw on like our upper body push day, you probably saw some barbell bench press going on, some dumbbell bench press, some landmine press, dumbbell floor press, push-up variations. Like there's a lot going on there. But one of those exercises, landmine press, is what I like to use a lot right now, because, as all the strength coaches know, to properly do a barbell bench press, like whenever you lay on the bench, you got to pinch your shoulder blades together to create that stable base. So that's really, we're talking scapular traction there. And to get the serratus, I want scapular protraction and upward rotation. So I absolutely love the landmine press. It was like a standalone. It was one of the main exercises I would utilize from an upper body push standpoint at Lindenwood, because from an exercise selection standpoint, that's another category of shoulder resiliency I mentioned. Because, for example, if at Lindenwood, if one of the athletes told me, hey, barbell bench press just feels weird on my shoulder, okay, you can do a landmine press, or you can do a dumbbell floor press, whatever. Basically not forcing a square peg into a round hole. Because one of the former SwimStrong athletes, he's in college now, he told us his strength coach had called him a not nice word for saying, hey, dude, I have a history of shoulder issues. Barbell bench press is a no-go. He called him, a not nice word. And this kid, okay, cool. That relationship is gone now because I don't trust you at all. So because if a swimmer, if I can check the box of upper body strength with a upper body pushing strength, with a landmine press or a floor press, if it may be because I gave this example, I was talking to someone before, there are swim coaches out there, some of them I might be writing workouts for right now. I don't know exactly. If they see barbell bench press in the program, you're going to be in trouble. Because they may have hey, that is a bad exercise, because they might have had a bad experience with it in the past. Because I've given the example before, you may have an athlete on your team who they could barbell bench press 100% with no issues, but they may have been growing up on a team with a coach who, since they were 13 years old, and now they're 18 with you in this example. So for the past 5 years, hey, barbell bench press is bad, you're going to hurt your shoulders. Even if an athlete could physically do it, if there's a mental block to an exercise, same thing goes with the lower body. You can do landmine press. I don't care. You're still strengthening, developing the upper body. But back to the serratus, I do love the landmine press as just programming that at step 1, because you can really emphasize reaching at the top of the rep to get that shoulder blade motion going on. So that's the serratus. And then, exercise selection, I kind of just touched on that, is another component of shoulder resiliency I like to address, because, it all just goes together. Because like I said earlier, the thing that bugged me typically is, they're doing the T-spine mobility and the rotator cuff. That's another component. And they're doing the rotator cuff, but they're not doing anything for movement of the scapula. They're not doing anything to target the serratus. The lat muscle, there's not a ton going on there either. So I like to address things from all those components, multiple angles that I like to address. And if an athlete has a specific question, if a coach has a specific question based on exercise modifications, hey, I've been going to a PT in person, and they're telling me this that I need to do, we'll have a more detailed discussion. But like you said, generally speaking, those are some components I like to address.
Amazing. Thank you. All right. So you've been with SwimStrong for a while, and it's, if you've been listening, you probably get that he's an online strength coach, which is there wasn't much of that going on a decade ago. Can you kind of talk about how SwimStrong came into development, and then can you talk to some of us who aren't doing the online coaching? Can you give us a little inside look to kind of the world that you live in?
Yeah, so SwimStrong was actually started on my high school team whenever I was a junior, because if you go follow us on Instagram, SwimStrong Dryland, I'm pretty sure that's our username for all of the major social medias. you'll see this dude Eric on there. He's like he's a taller dude. He wears tank tops a lot. So he was actually my dryland coach when I was a junior, senior in high school, and then we obviously maintained contact whenever I went off to college. So it wasn't called SwimStrong, but what he was doing with us in terms of the workouts we were doing whenever he got hired, my junior year, and another one of our coworkers, Sean, who's a year younger than me, so Sean's sophomore year, like what he was doing was pretty much laying the groundwork for what SwimStrong would become. So whenever I went off to school, like his wife is an ophthalmologist, so he's moved a couple of times, like to Philadelphia, back to St. Louis, down in Florida now. So he, when it comes to like moving around, like he would still keep contact with some of us. Like I was in college at the time, like I was talking to him, but not about training. But he would, maintain contact with athletes he had met in the St. Louis area, which is where, I'm from, the Philadelphia area and so on. So he's like, I'm pretty sure like, he could give a more exact answer than me, obviously, but I'm pretty sure that is what, kind of got the ball rolling from the standpoint of, a virtual dryland program, like just for swimmers. And so when it comes to whenever I got on board, it was in March of 2020. It was I officially came on like a couple weeks before the first COVID lockdowns happened. It was him, me, and then we have someone who Brittany handles all the nutrition side of things. So it's just the three of us. And then what we do is we work with club teams virtually. We meet with the coaches 8-9 months out of the year. We do not meet with them for championship months, because they have the months where championship meets are at, because they have other stuff to worry about. Because I would say like we do a lot of meetings, we do a lot of webinars, we do a lot of educational content. We do, because since we work with 18 and under athletes predominantly, obviously social media is a big part of that. So we do a lot of like content, both motivational and entertainment based through Instagram, TikTok, all that stuff. But I think when it comes to having success with an online program, specifically, because there's some athletes in my small group, like I am their, like virtual coach, because their team doesn't do it, they do it individually. Like I have some athletes who are because I'm in Hillsboro, Oregon right now, Northwestern Oregon. There are some athletes who are in the northeastern part, so like Delaware. Someone just joined from Delaware a couple of days ago. I have some people down in Florida. There's people in Texas, like literally all over the country. So like I'm not coaching them in person. So the main ways that I would say to gauge and get success with an online program is, one, make sure that the athlete, the family understands that you actually care. I know that's such a basic thing, like every strength coach is in tune with. But I boil that down to whenever like I do the initial like presentation, like we'll talk first, and I'll be like, hey, like what does your current dryland program look like, if you're doing anything, if you are doing anything, or if you're not doing anything, if this would be like the first structured program you follow. Like what issues are you having in the water? Some athletes will bring up like my shoulder hurts all the time, or like this stroke causes issues. Others will bring up my walls are like the weak point of my race, my flip turns, my open turns, pushing off the wall. I'm not powerful at all, and that's where I lose my races. And so I'll be able to, kind of like curate a little bit. If an athlete tells me they have a history of shoulder issues, which comes up a decent amount just with the demands of the sport, the components of shoulder resiliency I talked about, like we're going to go through those in some detail. So I know that this athlete that the athlete knows that their concerns, because a lot of swimmers, most of the time, if an individual athlete reaches out to us, if they want to take this program on top of their club team's training in the water, most of them want to take, swimming to the next level, regardless if that's D1, D2, D3, NAI, whatever. So that to say, like they are pretty serious about it. So I want to make sure serious about the sport and understanding, like, hey, like dryland, regardless if it's with our program or another program, can help them get there. So I will talk to them about, hey, if you're telling me your shoulder hurts, there's like 5 or 6 different components that I just went through a couple minutes ago that I'll go over with them. Like I'll water it down so a teenage athlete can understand what's going on and why that would help them. So that helps the athlete understand, okay, cool, like this program has resources. I told him my shoulder hurts. Within 5 minutes, he's given me this pretty detailed rundown of how we can then help with that. Because I don't like the term injury prevention. I much prefer injury reduction, because like stuff happens in sports, right? And especially like, we're taking hundreds, if not thousands of strokes in the water every day, every 2 days. Like there's a good chance the shoulders, if we're not taking care of it with how many strokes we're taking, the shoulders are going to ache a little bit. So the athlete's perspective, like I've kind of, like, hey, here's how we can help you. And then the parent, obviously, like they're seeing their kid like have to miss practice or have to like kick only because their shoulder hurts or whatever else is going on. That athlete I mentioned earlier, or the mom of the 12-year-old who has to get an MRI because her team had her dumbbell bench pressing with the 18-year-olds. Like I told her, like, I'm literally not worried at all about how much weight your daughter can use right now. It's all about body weight focus, learning how to move correctly. And, like, I always tell people, like, we love to, earn the right to be your dryland provider, basically, when it comes, in her case, from whenever you're 13 through high school. Like, we'll worry about like weight and like using resistance, specifically like dumbbells and like plates and all that good stuff down the road. Right now, it's only like body weight technique focus. That's literally all I care about. And then the parent, obviously, they get to, okay, cool. Like he was a swimmer. He understands, like, as I talk about how important communication is, because that's, I would say, from the parent side of things, most of the questions I get are like a mom had a really good couple questions for me last week. She basically said, because like we talk about how committing to the small group, because the small group workouts are 6 days a week for 45 minutes on top of what they do in the water. So we spent some time talking about how, important the time commitment component is to the program. And the mom kind of like, Uno reverse card me, which is a really good question. Hey, what commitments are you going to make to my athlete? And so what I tell her is like, I knew exactly what she meant. Like, that's the first time anyone had like asked me that directly. Like, I've had people like kind of beat around the bush, but she was direct with it, which is pretty cool. So pretty much, like, I tell everybody, and I told her that communication is by far the most important thing, because I know other competitors from a club team standpoint, I don't know what they do for the individuals, but for our club teams, like, we're there with you every step of the way. Like, there's components from, like, we use Google Sheets to write the workouts. So I tell the club coaches, if anything doesn't make sense from a logistics standpoint, if there's a log jam, if, for like an 11, 12, 9, 10, if this exercise is too easy or if it's too hard, just like text me, email me, whatever, and I can literally change that for you in less than 5 minutes. So like, we are there every step of the way, which I think is unique, because from what I've heard, other dryland programs out there who are operating in the same space we are, they're a little bit more so, hey, I will be with you at the beginning, and then we're going to teach you a lot so we can slowly, fade away and let you handle things in the future. Like, we have, like I said, like 9 months out of the year, we have Zoom meetings with the coaches, so they can ask literally any question. They can contact us anytime. And the same thing can be said for the athletes. Like, we do monthly meetings with each, because there's me, there's 4 other small group coaches within our program. We all have monthly small group meetings. There's this app called Meet Mobile that tracks literally every time from every swim meet in the country. If it's a like legit swim meet through USA Swimming, they have it. So I have all my athletes start on that so I can track results. And, if a kid drops a ton of time, hey, like, awesome, like, I'll reach out, let them know, because they're, oh, he's actually paying attention to me. Then on the flip side of that, if an athlete doesn't drop any time, I'll just kind of be open-ended with it. I'm like, hey, how'd that meet feel? And they'll give me their answer, which then can lead to a more detailed discussion on, let's just say, for the sake of example, they said, their flip turns kind of cost them. It could be either like, because sometimes like athletes will straight up just slip on the wall and kind of like toss the race after that. But some athletes, they're just not powerful off the walls. Their underwater dolphin kicking isn't very good, because that was my weakness whenever I swam my underwaters. If they tell me that, then we can, go down the path of having a more detailed discussion about what are things we can do to directly address that, so we can make this program, more individualized for you, even though it's a virtual setup.
You've got 30 teams. Just ballpark, how many of those athletes are under 12 years old?
So I'd say at least, I think our program, I don't have the real number. I'm very confident in saying program wide, I believe we've crossed 15,000 athletes. I'm pretty sure. I would say like definitely around half, like 40 to 50% are the 12 and unders.
Okay, so with that, that's a pretty good chunk. I mean, talking about several hundred children. Do you have any tips for other coaches who are working with that age group, or maybe like me, I've got some young ones at home. If I'm trying to help them be the best, not necessarily the best swimmers they can be, but we can talk about that, but maybe just the best athletes they can be. Do you have any advice or rules of thumb that you like to follow?
Yeah, I think the first one is just make it as fun as possible, so they grow up viewing dryland training, strength training, whatever term you want to put on it. We obviously call it dryland. So they view dryland as something beneficial, and it's not something they have to do. It's something they get to do, because the 12 and under is like half of their time. Like, for example, if they have 20 minutes, they have 30 minutes. If they have 20 minutes, around 6 to 7, and then if they have 30, about the same, because every team is different. But all that to say, every workout for the 12 and unders is going to have a game of some sort, whether it could be like red light, green light. If they have enough space to play tag, like they'll play tag, they'll do relay races, they'll do, follow the leader, they'll do like all this, duck, duck, goose, like depending on the space they have, like we'll throw that in there for them. But basically, it's, they're going to accomplish some type of work. Again, like work for a 10 and under might be practicing a squat for 5 minutes and then practicing a high plank for 5 minutes. And if that's too like easy for them, because a couple of teams have told us like their 9-10s, 11-12s are kind of past that, we'll do like, like a 5-minute circuit and then a 5-minute circuit, and then they'll play games after that. Like the water bottle reaction game is a really big hit with our kids. That I've gotten feedback from club coaches. So basically just make it fun. And then also on top of that, with my setup specifically, is listen to the coaches who are actually implementing the workouts. Because for example, it could be something, like I said, like some coaches have told us, hey, like the practice time setup, like they're kind of past that. Can we do some more like structured work? Because the kids, like their attention spans are there, like they're mature enough to handle it. Hey, like we're not just practicing for 5 minutes, we're doing a structured circuit with reps. Like some of them are good with that. Like I said, like making sure you're not fast tracking anything, not skipping steps. Again, back to like that 12-year-old girl had no business doing dumbbell bench press, in my opinion. Like just do push-ups, train multiple planes of motion, make it fun, just encourage them to be athletes out of the water. Those are the main points I look to when it comes to like my setup specifically.
Excellent. Thank you. And then you have gone from a swimmer to moving some pretty good weight in the weight room. And then your most recent endeavor is some martial arts, actually. So how's it going with jiu-jitsu, and what do you think are some of like the important things that you're doing in the weight room that are helping you out with that?
Yeah, so I'd say it's going pretty well. I got 2 stripes on my white belt a couple weeks ago, so that was pretty cool. Because this is like the most humbling thing I've been through in my entire life, like just the overall journey, from the standpoint of, because I knew I was going to eat it, because I've been training for 11 months now. It'll be a year at the mid-January, I think it'll be a year. Just from the standpoint of like, I knew, because like I said, like after I swam, I feel like most guys especially, they either go the powerlifting route and just want to lift heavy all the time, which is the route I went, or they went, they more so the bodybuilding route. So I was, pretty strong heading into it. Like I knew like, yeah, I'm probably going to get rocked by some kid like half my age, like on the mats, which is pretty much exactly what happened. This dude he just got his permit, so he's 15, and like he still does, because he's been wrestling his whole life, but he's been working me a little bit. This was going pretty well. It's weird because I'm thinking about what I do in the weight room now to specifically transfer over to the mats, and it's a lot of the same stuff. Like I will say, I definitely don't lift as heavy anymore, and I have to have some modifications ready to go from the standpoint of, like, for example, like a couple, was it like last week, week and a half ago, something like that. Like my rotator cuff was a little irritated, so I just went with, like I only trained my left side because my right side was a little ticked off, so I left that alone. Something, depending on if you're focusing on grappling or kickboxing, like maybe you limit axial loading a little bit with the low back, depending on the person, depending on their injury history. Because I was really lucky with swimming, like on top of like the general, like kind of every now and then my shoulders get a little cranky just from all the yards. But outside of that, like I didn't have any major injuries. So that transferred over from the standpoint of, I feel like I've been very resilient, like training MMA and doing jiu-jitsu, but just making sure, like, I mentioned like unilateral training earlier. I do a lot of single leg work, whether that's like specifically single leg RDLs, like, cause I'm good doing, I don't need a ton of variation from an exercise selection standpoint to like keep myself happy in the weight room. So I'll do a good amount of skater squats, a good amount of single leg RDLs. I'll do like sumo deadlifts that'll be a staple. And then with the upper body, like it kind of just depends. Like sometimes I'll do flat dumbbell bench, but recently I've transitioned more so to landmine when I've been dealing with this. I first got back in a couple of days ago. So it's really, because I've been thinking like a lot of the movements I'm doing, like I would say are pretty much the same, just from the standpoint of obviously I'm not going as heavier with it. I'm paying more attention to the volume because I do get a lot of volume, like on the mats. I view it, that's a similarity between training MMA and swimming. Like the swimming, I take with the athletes now, like I do and the athletes in Lindenwood, I was a big fan of tempos because I feel like, like eccentric, isometric tempos, all that good stuff. Because I feel like that's a way to get the time under tension to get them strong, stronger, more powerful, whatever the goal of that specific phase was, without doing, like, for example, like if I can do 5 pull-ups with a 4-second eccentric, like a true 4-second eccentric, or if I could do 10 pull-ups, like I'm going to do the 5 pull-ups with a 4-second eccentric every time because I'm cutting the volume in half. Like I'm just putting a tempo on it. So I've found a similar path to follow on the MMA side of things, because depending on the day, like 1, 2, 3 hours, like I know is typical for some of the guys at the gym, like including myself. Because like if they're training on the mats for 3 hours, most likely, they're getting some good volume there. Then it's just a matter of, understanding what are they not getting a lot of, whether it's like upper push, like because lower body is generally moving pretty good. So pay attention to the upper body because that's just kind of what I've been paying attention to, or things that I've noticed. I still do lower push pull, upper push pull. I'll do some shoulder resiliency stuff. I'll make sure I'm mobile enough specifically with the hips, because who knows what position you're going to end up either having to fight out of or a position you're going to get put in, with jiu-jitsu especially. So I feel like it's a lot of the similar stuff. I've just refined it a little bit on the volume intensity side of things.
Yeah, so you're kind of like it's interesting when someone kind of dives so deep into one facet of whether it's the weight room and swimming or whatever, but you use that model and you transfer it to other things. So your pattern of thinking, your pattern of training for jiu-jitsu is just built on this awesome background you have in the water.
Yeah, because I was thinking as I was talking through there, I'm like, oh, like a lot of the exercises I do are pretty much the same. Like I'll just have to, like, specifically in my case, specifically with the shoulder, like for this past week, I'm pretty much back to 100% now. Like I'll just have to pay more attention. Like, don't go train with your ego. And, if I only have to do left side only, or if I have to do like floor press or something like that, like just making sure I pay more attention how I'm feeling that day.
I call that Hellboy training when, if you remember the comic book character with the huge arm on one side.
Oh yeah.
It's like sometimes, I enjoy that symmetry and pretending that my body is perfectly symmetrical, but sometimes you're just like, you're beat on one side, or you got a tweak or something. You're just like, you got to hit that other side.
Yeah.
What do you see for your professional future and maybe the future of like the strength and conditioning industry? And you can take that any direction you want. You can take that with the science or the social media or the online.
Yeah, I'd say with SwimStrong specifically, really getting a foothold in every aspect of swimming from the standpoint, because like I said earlier, like with the programs we have for club teams, we have some programs for individual athletes. But also we have recently we've recently added a subscription-based model for swimmers. So from the standpoint of, for the 12 and unders, most likely, it's going to be the parents who are reaching out, showing interest. So recently we have added an option where if you're the parent to go through the age groups in 8 and under, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 18, or if you're an international athlete, there will be a program available for you on the site. So literally we have regardless if you're a club athlete, a domestic athlete, an international athlete, depending of your age group, like doesn't matter of your age group. I mean, literally every single person, if you're swimming 18 under swimming, like club level swimming, like we have a program for you. And then we have various collegiate options available from the standpoint of, because I spent, on top of Louisville and my time with Lindenwood, I think I spent like 6 years coaching in college or something like that, like 5 to 6 years in that area. So we have dryland programs available. We have weight room programs available. We have some like consulting services available. For the college teams, for the college athletes, there is an in-season college swimmer program that we have available. So if it's an individual, because we've heard some of the people in doing the college athlete program this year, they've told us like pretty similar, because I kind of asked them, hey, what made you reach out? And one of them said something along the lines of their strength coach literally copy and pasted like the men's look. I forget the other team it was, but the reason they knew it was another team because he went to Excel, hit save as like men's swimming, but he didn't change the actual like text on the sheet. So all the swimmers got the sheet and like, oh, this says men's lacrosse, and then my screen's doing fireworks right now for some reason.
I mean, it looks amazing.
Yeah,
no
like that happens to me on Zoom. That happens to me on Zoom too. Like whenever I talk to athletes, I'm like thumbs up and or whatever. Yeah, so like the guys are like, hey, like this is the men's lacrosse sheet, and it turned out like they're literally just copying and pasting lifts. So that's why this particular athlete reached out. So if you're a college team, you're a college coach, college athlete, we got you covered. And then for the post grad master's swimming is what it's called. We have various levels of master swimming. We partnered with Brett Hawk. He's an Australian Olympian. He was a swim coach in Auburn, I believe in the mid 2000s. I may be wrong on that, but he was a swim coach in Auburn when Auburn was like an absolute powerhouse. We partnered with him because he has some master swimming programs that, we provided the dryland side of things. So we have masters level 1, 2, 3, and then the elite track, depending on, because there's some people, like there's a team who joined on recently. The majority of their athletes, like a master's team, are in like the 40s, 50s, 60s. So, they'll go with like the level 1 or level 2 because those are the more basic stuff for them. And then on top of that, we have a pro athlete program available for people who are like representing their countries on the world stage. Because with the way citizenship works with the sport of swimming, like there's some athletes who are like living in America, but they can swim for XYZ country, depending on where they're at. So we have that available as well if athletes are interested. So I really feel just like making sure that we kind of build the necessary relationships and get the necessary footholds in place to keep on growing with the online business we got going on for us personally. And then when it comes to the industry as a whole, like I feel like becoming more like app-based, and I might be biased because like I work with a virtual company right now. I can't see the industry as a whole becoming more app-based, maybe not so much in the collegiate setting because you're there with them, obviously. But I also don't think that, like technology and app, like the AI camera coaching athletes, like I don't think that'll ever replace a good relationship with a coach, whether your coach is in person or if your coach, like for me, for the kids who live in like Florida, if it's virtual, just making that relationship. I think that's always going to be the number one component of having a successful career as a whole, but also making sure you have a successful coach to athlete relationship.
Nice. So calling this podcast the Winning Wellness Podcast, and that's basically like a double-edged sword of when you're fit and you're healthy, you get to pursue winning, in whatever form that is. Maybe you're an athlete, maybe you're trying to grow your biceps, but when you're not fit and healthy and set up for success, you might actually have to win your health back. So with that in mind, do you have maybe the number one thing everybody needs to be doing, or maybe just the number one thing that you want to talk about today to basically win your wellness or to be well?
Yeah, so I tell athletes, that the athletes we work with, that hydration is literally the act of drinking water is literally the easiest thing we can do to have a positive impact on our wellness and our lives. It's like I tell them, hey, because sometimes, just doing that is so easy, just to making sure that you're drinking enough and, drinking like not smashing like the whatever soda product you prefer, making sure like, hey, like, are you actually having water? Like that can do some good things for you. On top of that, because again, we are working with predominantly 18 and under athletes. So I'd say just limiting smartphone screen time, limiting screen time in general, and just living the life in front of you is just pretty important. Not getting sucked up in, all the algorithms, like the dopamine drip they got going on, scientifically curated over there to keep you hooked. I think just living the life in front of you is pretty good. Is a good starting point.
Coach, I think those are two awesome pillars that somebody could probably, focus on, and that would help out pretty much all of us. Thank you for sharing that. And then what's going on with the dog situation over at the house right now? You kind of give me some cool insight to that in the past. Do you want to kind of tell everybody what you got going on?
Yeah, so we have 3 dogs and then 1 cat. The dogs are Duncan, who's actually a tripod. He's missing his back right leg. He was born as a stray, got hit by a car, and by the time the shelter got to him, the bone had set in the wrong spot. So he was just going to be better off without it. So he is a Pit Lab mix. We got Echo, who is a Pit Great Dane mix, and then she's got some boxer as well. And then Atlas is a Pit Shar-Pei mix, and then we got a black and white cat named Moo running around. So they keep things interesting for sure. You know, they're behaved very well, like they get excited and play and all that good stuff, but there's no like nightmare. Like we see super high energy dogs like every single second of every day. Like they're pretty chill for the most part, which is pretty good. But yeah, they keep things they keep us busy for sure.
How long you been fostering dogs?
So we were fostering because whenever Renee came to, me and Renee started dating halfway through sophomore year of undergrad. At the beginning of junior year, so junior year at Eastern is when you can, move out of the dorms and just like rent one of the houses. She brought her dog Daisy there. So Daisy was like kind of de facto my dog starting, or our dog, I should say, start of junior year. And then the summer before senior year is when we adopted Duncan. So we had those 2 for a couple years. And then I think it was February of 2019, Daisy passed on. And so you know how it is, like we weren't ready to fully commit to another dog just yet, but we did miss having 2 in the house. So I'd say from that point on, for about 6-7 months, we fostered a handful of dogs. And then we were, like, okay, cool. I think we're ready to adopt like another dog as one of ours. So we adopted Echo in the fall of 2019, I think it was. And then, we let her kind of grow up out of her, like puppy phase and all that good stuff. When she kind of got established from a behavior standpoint, we started fostering again. So I think in total, we ended up fostering, like 8 dogs and 4 cats or something like that. Then, I think the term is a failed foster, because Atlas was a failed foster. So he was like a puppy. He was like 5 months old, maybe a little bit younger, when we adopted him. So, with 3 dogs, we had adopted Moo, our cat, in between that point. So whenever we adopted Atlas, we already had 2 dogs and then Moo running around. So as of now, we've put a hold on fostering for the time being. But I know that in the future, like that'll be something we get back into.
Yeah. Excellent. It's that's something you didn't talk about too much, but I was kind of stuck in my mind when you were telling the little you did tell me about it. If listeners want to reach out to you or follow you, how can they get a hold of you or see what you're doing?
Yeah, so my Instagram is Bryan MCPH. So BRYAN MCPH. So that'll be Instagram. That's pretty much the only thing I'm on.
Thank you so much for your time today, your expertise, that SwimStrong. They make a pretty cool sweatshirt that you're wearing there, organization that you're working with, and love hearing about it. And I know, I get to coach swimming for a few more months into the end of this season here. And so like some of the stuff that you shared with me today is going to help me out big time, just to kind of finish the year strong.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for listening to our Winning Wellness podcast. If you have any questions or suggestions for podcast guests or topics, you can submit those through YouTube comments. You can message me on Instagram. My handle is Mitch Schwartzman, or you can email me at coachmitchschwartzman@gmail.com.